Do you ever get an idea for a project and you just really hope that it turns out as well as you imagined it? Well, in this case it did, and I would argue it turned out even better. And I'm talking about the fence we built around my garden area. Now, this was my garden before. We had raised beds and it was kind of cornered off in one area of our yard. But I had this idea to fence it in, really for the purpose of being able to plant more things around it without taking up much more of my backyard garden space. So that's what we did. We set about designing a really simple, inexpensive, but sturdy and long-lasting fence for our garden area. So I'm going to show you exactly how we did that. There are so many ways you can design a garden fence, and it kind of just depends on your needs and your taste. I mean, do you want vertical slats or horizontal slats? Do you want to be able to see through the fence, or do you need it for privacy? What materials do you want to use? A lot of times you'll see a wooden fence frame with a metal mesh like rabbit fencing or hardware cloth or something closing in the fence. It really just depends on what you're looking for. So I want to be able to see the garden, and I also just want a visual barrier around the garden section of my yard, and then I want to create more planting beds around it. So those are my goals. So I want to keep it as attractive as possible, but while also being as inexpensive as possible, and I want it to last a long time. So those are the three things that we're balancing. So let me show you the design. That's what I have here. So the design we settled on is simple posts in the corners and then 3 horizontal slats spaced out along the posts. By the way, when I say we, I have to shout out my husband, Greg. He is the construction and carpentry expert in our family. Now, I am 100% there. I am his willing and able assistant, semi-able at least, willing to take instruction. But he is the project manager. Even if I'm the designer, he's the manager of the project. So this really was a combined effort of ours. So for the corners of the garden fence, we decided to use 4x4 pressure treated posts. And then between each fence section, we used pressure treated 2x4s to combine everything together. For the slats themselves, we could have continued to use pressure treated wood, but again, in the name of budget friendliness, we instead bought 8-foot fence pickets. We ripped them in half lengthwise to make them a little narrower and then cut them in half widthwise. So we had these 4-foot sections that we could use as fence slats. Now, admittedly, this does have a little more of a rustic look. You'll see it when I show you the final fence. And we like that. It makes it casual. It makes it feel really homey and kind of kitchen garden-y. But if you want a cleaner, more modern look, I would suggest sticking with some pressure treated boards. So as far as the size goes, we wanted the fence to be roughly 3 feet high. We felt like that was tall enough so it feels like a fence, but it's not going to obstruct the view. So the corner 4x4 posts are 35 inches high, and then the 2x4s in between each section are 34 inches high. And we did that so that the posts would stick up about 1 inch above the horizontal slats, and we put little solar lights on top of them, which looks really nice. And then the slats themselves, it took a little bit of figuring to see what looked best as far as how to space them out. But we aligned the top slat with the top of the posts, and then we left 8 inches between the other 2 slats, and the bottom slat is about 10 inches off the ground. And that was what we figured out looked the best. We liked having a little more space on the bottom just for airflow and so that the view isn't obstructed and it looks nice and even. So that's the design we came up with, and now I'll show you how we did it. The first thing was layout. We measured exactly where we wanted to put the fence. So we left about 2.5 feet of space between the edge of the bed and where the fence was going to be. We took our time making sure everything was lined up and level. Once we figured out the placement of the fence with the string, the next thing was to dig the holes for the corner posts, those 4x4 posts that I mentioned. We dug the holes pretty deep because we wanted to really anchor them in the ground with cement. So we tried to dig at least 1 foot deep for these post holes. Before we could place these in the ground, we first took asphalt paint and painted the bottom of the posts to protect them from water. We have a lot of ants and we actually have termites in our soil. It's really fun keeping them away from the house. But we want to make sure these posts last. Otherwise, they're going to be completely destroyed within a year or two. Once we were happy with the height of the posts and how deep those post holes were, then we dumped in some concrete powder and then filled it with water and left it to set. We followed the same process for the other posts, the 2x4 posts that are going to be in between each section of fence. Once the cement was set, then we just had to backfill with soil and tamp them in place really well. And we were so happy with how sturdy these seemed. Now we're ready to move on to the horizontal fence slats. We used a bandsaw to rip each fence board in half lengthwise and then cut them in half widthwise. And then each fence section on each side of the garden fence was slightly different. That's the tricky thing about layout, is you really have to kind of personalize it to your space. So we just carefully measured as we went to make sure that everything was as accurate as we could make it. Once everything was cut, it was a pretty simple matter to attach the fence boards. We made sure to measure the exact height of each slat, and then we pre-drilled holes into the posts to make sure that the wood wouldn't split. And then we just tackled each fence section at a time, and we screwed each slat into place using 2 deck screws so they'd really stay put. Once we worked our way around the whole fence, we were pretty much done, and you could see how it was all coming together. We did have to come back after and just double check the height of all the posts and do a little bit of trimming. And then it was time for me to paint. I decided to continue using the black asphalt paint to further protect my fence from the elements so that it would last as long as possible. I'm not planning on growing any plants directly on these boards, but if you're not comfortable with using something like asphalt paint in your garden, you do not have to do this, or you can choose another product that'll work best for your situation. But I am very happy with how it turned out, and I do feel like it's going to make my fence last a lot longer. Now, this took a while because you know how it is. You do 90% of a project and then it takes you forever to finish the last 10%. But I did eventually finish painting the whole fence, and it looks awesome. It's now a few months later. I've got my fall garden planted, but the fence is completely finished, and I'm so happy with how it turned out. You might notice there's an addition that we made, and that is our garden arbor archway over the entrance to my garden area. We've got a grapevine climbing on it. And I do have another video showing how we made that, so I'll be sure to link to it. I love how the black really makes all of the plants pop, and it both sort of blends in and stands out from the rest of the garden. I think the best thing of all, though, is that all of the fence materials cost us less than $200. Now, there was a lot of time and labor involved, but overall we kept the cost really low. So I hope this inspires you to tackle a garden project you've had in mind for a while. Let me know if you've done something like this, or if you have other inexpensive solutions to garden problems that you want to share. And also, just let me know in the comments if you have any questions about this process or the materials that we used. I'll link to everything. But thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.